Hey guys, this is Karin. Justin and I are taking the first couple of videos for this channel to explain our own personal stories about Crohn's disease and how it affects us. If you haven't seen Justin's video yet and you want to see it, click here. Otherwise, let's just get started. Here's my story. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in high school when I was about 15 years old. At first, we thought it might be an ulcer or some other type of issue, but we had some tests done, including a colonoscopy and an upper scope through the esophagus, and those options were ruled out. The colonoscopy was really the thing that determined that I had Crohn's disease. And right away, I was put on Pentasa, which at that time was kind of the newest form of treatment for Crohn's disease, which at that time was not very well known. Not a lot of knowledge was available to patients or doctors. There was no good way to treat it and no good way to manage symptoms at the time. So I was put on Pentasa and I took it for about a month, but being a stubborn teenager, after not seeing results from it, I decided to stop taking it on my own and basically gave a big middle finger to everything regarding Crohn's treatment and the doctors. Luckily, that decision didn't have any bad effects. Fortunately for me, for the next 12 years or so, I was in remission. I would maybe have a Crohn's flare-up once or twice a year, but I was mostly good. And then last year happened. Fast forward to last year, about summertime, I started having increasing abdominal pain and my stomach was gurgly and I just didn't feel right. And at the middle of the summer, I ended up in the hospital for a bowel blockage. Luckily for me, the bowel blockage resolved itself. I was connected to a gastroenterologist after being released, and he put me on Remicade, which is an infusion medication that a lot of Crohn's and ulcerative colitis patients start out on when they seek treatment. It's very gentle and it helps a lot of people for years. However, some people develop antibodies and they have to move on to a different medication. So I had one dose of Remicade and I was feeling pretty good about it. I was positive. I was happy that I was going to be managing my Crohn's again, although unhappy that it decided to tell me who really was boss in my life. Although I was on Remicade, and at no fault of Remicade's, I ended up in the hospital 2 weeks later in the most pain that I've ever had in my life. A CT scan showed that I had a perforation in my bowel, and that perforation had been slowly allowing liquid from my gut to seep into other areas of my gut where it wasn't supposed to be. I was septic, I was in pain, I was feverish, I couldn't move, I could barely speak. I had to crawl my way out of my apartment with my dad's help, pretty much. It was scary. So I was immediately admitted and I was actually shipped downtown to the Henry Ford Hospital downtown Detroit to have an emergency surgery happen. At this point, I don't really remember a whole lot because I was hopped up on pain medication, but I do remember saying goodbye to my mom and my dad and Justin, who had come down, and I went into the OR. What happened in the OR was pretty scary. They ended up resecting 2 feet of my small intestine in the jejunum, and they also found an area that contained cancerous cells. On top of everything, my blood pressure was dropping, I wasn't doing good on the table, and I almost died twice. In addition to that, they found an area that had cancerous cells. The surgeon said he got everything out. He was pretty confident of that, and we kind of went on from there. I was in the ICU for 3 weeks. I lost 25 pounds. I was hooked up to IV tubes and PICC lines, and I had tubes down my throat and up my nose down to my throat. And I was, woozy and couldn't remember anything being on those strong pain meds. And half the time I would drift off to sleep and start conversations that didn't make any sense. I'm pretty sure the nurses thought I was a crazy person. A second surgery had been planned, but they decided against it due to my declining health. So I got out of that, but I was still in really bad shape, as you can imagine. Being septic is not funny, and it takes a long time to recover from that. All in all, I was in the hospital about a month, and after I got released, I remember feeling such a sense of relief, and when I walked out the doors to my mom's car, I cried. I could smell fresh air, I saw tall buildings, I saw life, and being confined into a small box of a room for 4 weeks, it'll drive you insane. So getting out was glorious for me, and I ended up staying at my parents' house for probably a good month and a half. Unfortunately, I still wasn't healthy. It took a long time for me to even regain an appetite after not eating even for most of that month that I was in the hospital. On top of that, I ended up losing my job because I was so new at the position. I wasn't protected from any kind of medical emergency that took me out of the office for so long. So it was a dark time, rough time. Luckily, I was able to go back to my apartment eventually and kind of live my life and heal and nurture myself and get the sleep that I needed and get the nourishment I needed. Simple things were hard. Climbing a few stairs was really tough. Getting out of bed some days was really tough. Showering was very, very tough for a while. Because of the cancer cells that they found in my bowel, I was connected with an oncologist in the health system, and she recommended that even though I was technically cancer-free, there still could have been some cells that were floating around my gut that escaped through that perforation in my jejunum. So she recommended I have a port placed inside of my body so I could receive chemotherapy. And that type of chemotherapy was a preventative measure since I was in such a gray area. So I had the port placed and I was all set to go for chemo, but I started having fevers and I started having elevated liver enzymes. And because of these complications, I was never able to even receive chemotherapy, which I actually consider a good thing. I was admitted to the hospital again, and they found an abscess in the scar of the incision where I had the surgery. So that abscess ended up becoming a fistula. And so I was dealing with that in and out of the hospital for an entire month. And eventually I had the port removed because it found out that the port was part of the problem. So as you can imagine, I was getting really frustrated with my healthcare system. So I decided to get a second opinion at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and saw the same doctors that Justin saw when he got care there. I really trust them, I like them, and I trust in their expertise and what they can do for me. So we went there in the end of February, early March of this year. They ran some tests and decided to put me on a medication called Entyvio. It's an infusion medication just like Remicade, but they decided to go with Entyvio because of my cancer situation and also the fistula situation. They thought it could help the most. So they put me on that, and I really believe that it's helping me. I believe that the symptoms of Crohn's have dissipated, and I believe the fistula has improved on Entyvio, though it still hasn't gone away fully. Mayo set me up with an oncologist for my cancer scare, but they determined that I didn't have much to worry about because of some blood tests that they ran that determined whether or not they could see any activity going on, and luckily that was negative. So that's a good plus. Unfortunately, between the time of surgery and later this year, I developed a mass of fluid in my pelvic area. They did try to drain it, but unfortunately they could only drain so much because the liquid inside this mass was so thick. So that is going to eventually need to come out. And I'm ultimately expecting surgery in the beginning of 2018 to not only remove that mass, but also fix the fistula and hopefully repair that area of jejunum that was kind of screwed up during my initial surgery last year. So it's been a really long and tiring road, as you can imagine, but you can't give up. You have to keep fighting and you have to keep going by what your doctors recommend. So that's my story. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them. And also make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video too. And if you have an Instagram account, make sure to follow us at Crohn's Couple. Thanks for watching.